All right, we're going to take you live to our story, our live story that we're currently monitoring. That is, of course, in Gaza, pertaining to the ceasefire deal. As you can see, that those are military trucks. I'm not sure which part of the region this is, but what we understand at this stage, we are now moving towards the finalization of that exchange of hostages as well as prisoners between Israel as well as Gaza. And of course, the hostages that will be received by the Israelis will be received from the Gaza square. And that is, of course, if you remember, the focal protest point, as this was the site where these families of the hostages had been protesting. They're staging months-long protests and, of course, calling for the release of their hostages. And, of course, we do understand there is a huge clock there at Gaza Square that is counting the days since the hostages were taken. And this is also the point where we understand. We heard earlier reports that the families of the hostages had prevented those UN aid trucks from entering Gaza. This is when the war had just strictly intensified. I'm going to bring in SABC News foreign editor Sophie Mokoena to also just come and take us through these current developments, as we are now well into 19 minutes past the designated time for that release as well as exchange of hostages was set to begin. So, Sophie, look at what we are seeing now. It looks like the stage is set for that exchange to take place. What are you observing?
Yes, this is a southern border of Israel. We expect the Red Cross cars to arrive and hand over the three ladies to the Israeli authorities. You saw that helicopter. I think that helicopter is going to take them to Israel and perhaps the best facility where they can get counseling, they can get treatment, and they can check them. As you can see, there's movement. You'd recall the agreement was that at 4:30 p.m. the handing over will happen. Immediately on the other side, at the prison, you will see movement where the women and children who are in jail in Israel are being released, having to go home into the Palestinian territory. So you can see that movement, that any time from now, that Red Cross or that Red Cross convoy is likely going to arrive. We saw the Red Cross convoy earlier on going into a place where Hamas is handing over the three hostages, and therefore this movement now, it's all about taking these hostages to Israel. As you know, that this is not the first time. We saw a similar movement during that pause, where we saw the hostages being driven to a particular point by the Hamas team, and then handing the hostages over to Red Cross, and then Red Cross hand over to the Israeli authorities. They don't meet. Hamas and Israel officials, they don't get involved directly.
A mediator.
Yes, the Red Cross, as a reputable organization in terms of these kinds of crises, is the one that has to do the work. So you can see now that activity now, it's really becoming hectic. So I think they may still meet the deadline of 4:30, or it might be towards 5 or 5:30. But clearly now we can really say that this is happening. There you see a prison on the right, a prison where the Palestinians who are in prison will be released. You can see that other picture there. It's
the
about
prison.
Yes,
Sophie.
yes. And then that moving shot, it's another place where we expect that it will be the hostages, and therefore the movement is there. And I mean, the key was when the Office of the Prime Minister of Israel
just
had
gave
a
an
media
update,
briefing.
yes.
They knew that now things are under control, things are happening.
And I can just confirm also, Sophie, we do have the names of those 3 hostages said to be released by Hamas. It is Doron Steinbracher, Emily Damari, as well as Romy Gonen. And we understand one of these citizens is a British citizen, and the UK had already sent out messages of support and, of course, waiting in anticipation to welcome her there as, of course, she returns to the UK. And we understand, Sophie, a media area has also been set up for journalists. A blue barriers has been brought up in anticipation of possible larger crowds and even families and supporters. And we're also hearing that we're expecting Hamas to hand over all these 3 women, but they will be given to the military, the Israeli military, who will then take them to one of 3 locations, which is outside of Gaza, and I suppose through that UN intervention that you were talking about.
Through the Red Cross intervention.
Red Cross, yes.
Because with Red Cross, then you have people with experience. You know that in relation to hostage drama, kidnapping, Red Cross is quite experienced in this, including situations of war. You know, they were there a long time ago, First World War, Second World War. Say they have experience in terms of dealing with this kind of situation, because the hostages, where they are traumatized.
Absolutely.
And some of them, it's the first time now they are interacting with different
15 months.
people after 15 months. They can't even believe. Sometimes there's also fear that are we going to be safe? Nothing is going to happen. And therefore, it must be people with experience, particularly here you are dealing with young women. It's not a man or maybe prisoners, the military exchange. It's just ordinary citizens. And therefore, you have to handle this process with care. As you can see, the visuals now on the left, it is that square in Israel where families often gather every evening, day and night. Of course, you can see the numbers are growing. Welcome home, welcome home. They are hoping that before end of today or at night, they are going to be taken to, they won't go to this square, they will be taken to a hospital.
Absolutely. That hospital also has made an announcement, Sophie, that they've made preparations to debrief and medically assess some of these hostages as they come in. But what's interesting, Sophie, that I find is that Hamas, on their part, has said they have not been told by Israel as to exactly who the 90 prisoners that will be freed actually are. So talk to us about that. And remember that we actually had this delay earlier on this morning because Israel said we have not received the names of the hostages that we're supposed to exchange with.
Here, I think it has to do with the agreement. Apparently, the agreement indicates that they will release the names. But it's not clear whether both sides will release the names. Remember, with Israel, we knew that it's 3 hostages.
Absolutely, yes.
But with Israeli prisoners.
Palestinian prisoners, yes.
Not Palestinian prisoners, but ordinary Palestinians who are in prison, because this includes women and children, not necessarily your people who were in the front line in terms of fighting in the Gaza Strip. We don't know whether there was an agreement to release their names because it's a bigger number there. But we know that in terms of gender, it will be women and children. But sometimes you get these surprises where Hamas will say, we'll give you 3 people, all of a sudden it's 5 people. On the other hand, you have Israel saying we'll release 20 Palestinians, and all of a sudden it's a large number. So those are the issues that you have to also take into consideration.
And also interesting to note, for this first initial release and exchange phase, Sophie, is of course these are the hostages and prisoners, if you want to call them that, on the Palestinian side. These are the ones that are still alive. So we're not even sure about the condition of the ones that will be, of course, released during the phase 2 of the ceasefire deal?
Yes, phase 2 will include those who have died on both sides. And therefore, it will be the first time the families are aware that their loved ones are no more. Maybe those who will be released, who saw those ones passing on, might share information after being released from both sides. But officially, we are going to be able to get a sense of who has passed on both sides during the second phase, when you release both the hostages and those who have passed on. The same in relation to Palestinians from Israel. And therefore, this process is still very, very delicate and quite traumatic for many people, including the journalists. We tend to forget that some journalists have been on this story since the intensification of the fight between Hamas and Israel started. And therefore, they cover these events. Some of them have passed on, they've lost their loved ones, they've lost their colleagues. Even us who have been on this story since the 7th of October, it has been a long haul, and at times you need debriefs. That's why when you talk, you don't even need a paper. It's here, it's in your head.
It's all in your head.
You can visualize it. Even these three ladies, when I see their pictures, I remember when I was at the ICJ, you know that there were people who were supporting Israel legal team and the South African team. Those who had a rally from Israel supporting the Israel legal team had pictures of these ladies. I remember one elderly woman saying, "We don't know whether she's alive." And I can see her now in the picture because she had a picture. So it brings back memories, and it's a very difficult story for both sides.
Absolutely.
Particularly Palestinians, 46,000. You saw the visuals, some of the Palestinians going back to their homes.
Absolutely.
And they are walking long distances, you know. And when they arrive there, they are going to find ruins and bodies, bones, because when they were fleeing, some were killed and nobody took time to bury them with dignity. So when they go there, they still have to bury their loved ones.
Others don't even know if they have a home or a place to return to. But Sophie, I want us to emphasize the fact that this first exchange release phase consists of the 30 hostages on the Israeli side and, of course, the 90 Palestinians that are going to be returned to Palestine. Let's just emphasize that, because I think we're getting quite a lot of confusion when it comes to the hostages that will be released during this first initial phase.
Yes, it's 30 initial phase. So tomorrow, Tuesday, Wednesday.
During the 42 days.
Yes, today it's 3 women. Unless there's a surprise, because the other time we were told it's 5, and when they appeared, it was 12 people, you know. So you don't know. And the intention there is to demonstrate the commitment to releasing the hostages from Hamas side, but also Israel, also with surprises. They can say 90, only to find that it's 100. Also, you know, trying to show that we are willing to resolve this issue. So you are correct, 30 first phase in a staggered form. So it will be 3 today, maybe tomorrow it will be 10, and the other day we don't know. So that's how it's structured.
And according to reports yesterday, Egypt, a mediator in the ceasefire, said a total of 1,890 Palestinians, Sophie, would be released in the first 6-week stage of the ceasefire, while the Israel Justice Ministry also released a list of 734 prisoners and detainees that it said they should be free. Then they were expected to be among the 1,890. So we need to keep track of all these figures, because it's quite a lot of moving pieces as well pertaining to this ceasefire.
Yes, as I pointed out, that the issue of numbers can be very tricky because they can change. They can decide to withhold certain information deliberately. So you just have to wait and see when they are handed over. As soon as they have been handed over, Israel will issue a statement to say, we have received 3 hostages. The same with on the side of Hamas. They will issue a statement to say they have received so many people.
Sophie, let's talk about the humanitarian aid crisis while we're still on these visuals, and there's not much happening while we keep watch of course, when the first hostages are going to, of course, be featured there on our screen. But let's talk about the humanitarian crisis that we've been underpinning as, of course, the biggest crisis, humanitarian crisis that we've ever actually reported upon. Still at this stage, the UN aid food trucks, the World Health Organization is struggling to get through to the Gaza enclave due to the extent of damage that we're talking about on infrastructure as well as roads. So let's talk about, I mean, it's going to be quite a conceited and a long-term effort in ensuring that this aid actually does make its way into Gaza.
Yes, we saw the Rafah border, we saw the trucks coming in. But remember, the issue of logistics, quite important, because we must ensure that the security. That is why earlier in the day, we saw Hamas, the Gaza government coming out and saying, we have now brought all this, the police, we have revived the police service, and these police men and women will provide security in terms of the movements and the trucks and all of that. And therefore, I think you have to give protection or security to the trucks, because remember, people are hungry. People will try and you can experience stampede as people are pushing and surging, scrambling to get whatever they can get from these trucks, and therefore you have to ensure that that is taken care of. But the World Food Programme issued a statement earlier on. You see, it looks like this is the border where the handing over is going to happen.
Yes, we understand Israelis are actually gathering there for news of the release of the hostages there. And what you're seeing is the Gaza square there, where, of course, this critical exchange will be taking place. And we understand earlier on, Sophie, just to confirm, when you walked in, you were indeed correct. That was an Israeli Air Force helicopter that was landing in Ra'im in southern Israel, which is not far from the Gaza border, and that is, of course, was there to do exactly what we were speculating, and that was to pick up those hostages. What are you seeing on your side there?
Yeah, I think here this is a border, and I think this is where we are going to see the 3 ladies coming in for being processed document-wise.
You can see the pictures already there as well.
You'd recall that the same thing happened with the first pause, where this area was used, where the Red Cross hands over the hostages. You can see that they even have a big screen looking at what's happening. They're even celebrating.
They're having drinks, Sophie. It looks like it's a jovial mood.
I think for people who are going to and who are related to the 3, it's quite a relief. But anxiety is now creeping in to those who are still awaiting news, because you don't want this ceasefire now to collapse, because then it's going to be another long haul for those who are behind. But I think these families, I think people who are there, they are waiting to see them there. And I think you can see that picture there. They are hanging those pictures because, yeah, there's sense of anticipation.
And of course, I'm looking at these live reports, Sophie. Even the doctors, they are commenting, that saying from a medical center near Tel Aviv, saying that the medical teams really don't know what to expect of the situation of the hostages, and they'll be looking out for the effects of starvation as well as lack of sun. As you alluded to earlier, that some of these hostages is probably the first time they're even going outside in 15 months of captivity.
It's quite difficult to be a hostage in any circumstances. It's not a child's play. You are not a guest of those who took you and you are in captivity.
And we can only wonder
so you
the
don't
conditions
know
they were subjected
what's happening.
to.
But what we have experienced is that both sides are going to again exchange accusations. The others are going to say they were treated badly. The others are going to say they were not. And sometimes it's very difficult to access the hostages themselves after they were being released, because they are being protected for quite a long time before they can really express themselves. We know that some of those were released much earlier. After being released, they didn't even last long because they couldn't handle trauma or thinking of what happened, and they didn't divulge. So it's a difficult story. That is why taking people hostage, it's a war crime. It's a crime against humanity, irrespective of who you are and what are you fighting for. Under the Geneva Convention, it is a war crime against humanity. That is why the International Criminal Court issued warrant of arrest for both Hamas officials and also in terms of Benjamin Netanyahu and the former defense minister.
And maybe, Sophie, you brought that warrant of arrest just in a proper time and manner. What happens to the arrest warrant by the ICC pertaining to Benjamin Netanyahu alongside his defense minister?
The warrants still stand.
Okay.
Because in terms of the agreement, there is no way where there is an indication that there's going to be a waiver or they will hold or suspend the warrant of arrest, because ICC, ICJ, it's a complete different process.
So they still need to account to those processes.
They still need to account. And I think under normal circumstances, there's no way the United Nations Human Rights Commission will allow a situation where people are not able to answer for what they did from both sides. So I think that one, there's no way. Let's
go back to Palestine, Sophie. Looking at the future of Palestinians that will now have to make, or we've seen scores of them tracking their way back to their previous homes. How is that rebuilding process going to look like? How long are we looking at? We've seen the extent of damage in that particular region.
We can't even talk about rebuilding now, because
we haven't even assessed.
This first phase must lead to a situation that you are able to negotiate the second phase.
True.
If you are not able to negotiate the second phase, you are not going to go to the third phase. And that's where you engage in discussions in relation to rebuilding. And rebuilding is going to be very tough. Everybody would want to get a slice of what's gonna be pumped into Gaza in terms of rebuilding. And you are going to see countries jostling for tenders and to get something out of this.
Let's look at what we're currently seeing, Sophie. This is Khan Yunis, one of the regions that is still, of course, has had quite a lot of activity since the ceasefire deal was actually announced. You can see there's quite a lot of movement and anticipation on the ground as well. And after all this suffering, people are still eager to go back and rebuild.
Yes, people want to go back. They want to go back because they want to go and bury their loved ones. And you can see they are using any
means of transport. Yes.
Transport. They are even walking, and women and children. You can see that speaks to when we talk about serious violations of human rights. This is what we are talking about. And that is why South Africa went to the International Court of Justice. At 5, Oliver on Full View will be speaking to Minister of International Relations on the ceasefire implementation, and now and also recap on ICJ case a year on, because it was during this time when South Africa went to the ICJ. It speaks to, and the UN chief spoke about the trauma, the implication, but they didn't want to listen. Both sides didn't want to listen.
Absolutely. And he called for reforms pertaining to international law authority structures that need to be revisited, Sophie, particularly when it comes to the UN, because it looked like the world was just sitting by and there was no effective means for anybody to ensure that hostilities ended.
The collapse of multilateralism. Nobody wanted to listen to what UN was saying. The Security Council was divided. Those with veto powers were, the veto on ceasefire, America. The next thing it's Russia. So it was back and forth. And also the collapse of international law. This is what people were doing in the process, collapsing the international law. And that is why South Africa said, no, hang on. After World War II, we agreed to establish this world body UN. We then set up structures to strengthen the world body, and we came up with the Security Council. The aim of the Security Council is maintenance of peace around the world. We then had institutions to support that. And ICJ is a world court. Let's go there as countries, because that's what ICJ deals with. It doesn't deal with individual case, but country to country, to try and find a solution. But it was difficult also for ICJ, much as they made those interventions, the implementation, it wasn't there.
Absolutely. I mean, Sophie, what do you say to, and I keep going back to this point because one side has confirmed that apparently this deal had been signed 13 months ago. Do you know about this deal having been signed 13 months ago on the Israeli part? And what interest then would it have been for Israel to continue the bombardment up until such a stage, just days before Donald Trump, who had vowed that there'll be hell to pay, in his own words, should he come into office and those hostages are still in captivity?
I don't think it was signed, but it was on the table. That's what Joe Biden administration and those who were trying to intervene, Qatar, Egypt, and others, tried to do or seek to achieve after the signing. So you know that Israel was adamant that they want to hunt Hamas, and therefore it didn't go far, but the document was there. You may have had now recently alterations here and there, and that's what they are talking about, to say this agreement was there, but people didn't want to really implement the agreement.
All right, so we're looking at our visuals there, quite a lot happening. Israelis, I suppose, in anticipation, waiting for the receival of those 3 female hostages that are detained in Gaza. And we understand on the Palestinian side, 90 Palestinians are due to be exchanged for those 3 hostages that should be returned to Israel. Quite a lot moving pieces that is said to be taking place. Sophie, I mean, we're almost at the top of the hour now. The deadline was about 1600 hours Central African time, but we understand this is the Red Cross bus that is going to be instrumental in facilitating the official exchange.
Yes, this is the Red Cross. You can see the Red Cross. The bus is going to carry Palestinians. So with the hostages, it will be a small car, and of course a larger transport for Palestinians, because they are many.
And then in terms of the Palestinians, Sophie, you also said we don't know whether or not they were part of the army or the people that were fighting against Israel. So we also don't know the conditional state that they're going to be returned in. And we also don't know how actually they're going to be facilitated in terms of, I mean, there hasn't been any communication. So we don't know what to expect. You did mention it could be women and children, but people that were not associated even with the war, just detainees due to the conflict that was going on in the country.
Yes, yesterday we saw a 4-year-old, a 4-year-old being taken from prison. and then appearing before the court martial. That's the situation we are dealing with. Those who are in Israel, in jail, it's not only your fighters or senior people, you even have children. And you will see when they are being released that majority will be women and children. And as you can see, those buses are going to collect from the side of the Palestinians, the prisoners, because it's a large number.
Let's wrap up our discussion, because we're going to hand over to Full View. Sophie, I mean, what do you anticipate as soon as that official exchange takes place and days after that? Good news
I think,
only.
remember, it's staggered. So tomorrow, this is continuing, but we don't know the number. Tomorrow morning, they will indicate the names and the number of hostages, and also Israel side, they will indicate the number of Palestinians who will be released, while behind the scenes negotiations are happening in terms of ensuring that you agree to go to a second phase. And from second phase, negotiations are continuing to agree to arrive at the last hurdle, that is the third phase, the most difficult one.
All right, Sophie, thank you so much for your input this afternoon. That is SABC News international editor Sophie Mokoena there, just taking us through that whole entire release that we've just witnessed, or anticipation of the release or exchange of hostages and the release of Palestinians to the Gaza Strip. We understand it's 3 women hostages that will be released onto the Israeli side, and that is taking place there at Gaza Square, which is a very focal protest site for the families of said hostages. I'm going to hand you over now to the Full View team. That is Oliver Dixon, who is on the Full View. I'm sure we're going to keep you focused on that exchange of hostages as well as Palestinians between Israeli as well as Gaza. Amalisha Ntlantla-Jali. Oliver Dixon, it's over to you.
The gates had just opened at the Offa prison in Israel, where Palestinian prisoners are set to be released from. 1,900 prisoners is the amount and tally of prisoners that had been agreed to in the ceasefire deal that has to be released from Israeli prisons. 33 hostages, 33 Israeli hostages in particular, are to be released by Hamas, given back to Israel, and that exchange will be happening at the Gaza-Israel border. The footage you're seeing on the right of your screen at the moment is coming from the Tel Aviv hostage square, where scores of Israeli families are awaiting in bated breath for their loved ones to be released by Hamas, as the ceasefire deal has begun to take effect. 600 trucks of aid is expected to cross its way over the Rafah border into Gaza on a daily basis during the ceasefire deal. And of course, it all begins today. We'll be bringing you continuous live coverage and footage of that as it takes place. Various Israeli activists have called the ceasefire deal a historic moment in the return of family members. And of course, many Palestinians are awaiting for their brothers and sisters kept in solitary confinement and in confinement of Israeli prisons. The long-anticipated Gaza Strip ceasefire deal is officially in effect today. The first 3 Israeli hostages are being released by Hamas. More than 46,000 people have died since the Israeli-Hamas conflict began on October the 7th, 2023. We'll be bringing you continuous coverage on the details of this. Of course, the 33 hostages that will be handed over will be in a staggered way across the next 6 weeks. That is to say that not all 33 Palestinians, not all 33 Israeli hostages rather, have been released all at once. Similarly, not all 1,900 Palestinian prisoners are expected to be released all at once. The details of there, of course, having been the subject of lengthy negotiations between Hamas as well as Israeli officials, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu up until 2 nights ago having late into the evening negotiated with his cabinet some of the details of that, as cabinet had taken a vote on it, and the details on that, of course, being contentious in and of itself. There isn't much clarity at the moment as to whether or not there is specific monitoring done as we speak right now from the offer prison in Israel by the negotiating member states such as Egypt and the United States of America. Similarly, we'll be bringing you live footage of crossings at the Israel-Gaza border, where you will see Palestinian prisoners walking across that border back into Palestine. And of course, we will try and get you details on whether or not there is monitoring being done by the negotiating member state. Again, this being Egypt as well as the United States of America. And we'll be bringing you that footage of the Tel Aviv hostage square. SABC News International editor Sophie Mokoena is with us to give us some of the greater detail from what's going on at the moment. Sophie, what we're seeing there right now is live footage of the Tel Aviv hostage square. Do we know the names or exactly who the 33 hostages are, how they've been chosen? Has that been left entirely to the discretion of Hamas, or has there been recommendations about who should be released first and in what order by Israel?
Well, the vulnerable first, and that is why you are talking about these 3 young women. But you would recall that during the pause, we got told that they will release maybe 5 people, and all of a sudden you have 10. So even now we know that it's supposed to be 3 young women. We saw their names, we saw their pictures after Hamas released the list. And tomorrow you will see another chunk or number of them being released. We don't know what will be the criteria, but you always go first with the vulnerable, the children and the women. You are now on the screen seeing the square in Israel, where families always converge since that incident of the 17th of October 2023. They are also watching the big screens, and they have different positions, those big screens, where they are trying to make sense of what's happening, because communication is very, very dicey in terms of specifics. But what you saw earlier on, you saw the Red Cross truck, you saw the buses. That's the prison where you are going to release the Palestinians. It will be mainly children and women. As we saw yesterday, a 4-year-old appearing before a court martial. Now, on the other side, you have a border between Palestine, between Gaza and Israel, where you are going to see the release of the 3 women, and they will be taken to the southern border of Israel. The helicopter is already there waiting. It will take them to Tel Aviv, and they will be in hospital in Tel Aviv for the debriefs. At Rafah border, you have trucks now slowly moving in. You have to give support in terms of security to those trucks, because you might end up with stampede. People have been hungry, people have been scrambling for whatever they can get. So when you get those trucks coming in, you can see people, there's a surge towards those trucks. So the Gaza Authority, and they've set up now the police and the systems to ensure that we are able to escort those trucks. And so it's a lot of work. The logistics are quite difficult, and therefore that is why at times you even get confused, because this is a moving story. Anything can happen.
Yeah, in a short while, we're going to be speaking to the South African Minister of International Relations, Ronald Lamola, to get his reactions on this as we continue to get the coverage rolling live there. What you're seeing there is the exchange of the hostages, the first batch of Israeli hostages handed over by Hamas. That is on the right of your screen. On the left of your screen, you're seeing families and Israeli community members waiting for that to officially be shown to them on the big screens that is being shown at the Tel Aviv square. This changes the mood of the conflict entirely, Sophie.
Yes, this morning when we were told that there's a delay because Hamas wouldn't release the 3 names, there was fear that this ceasefire will completely collapse, because that's what happens often. But in an hour we saw Hamas saying we have now handed over the names, and Hamas saying that we didn't hand over the names because there were drones, Israel drones, hovering over what we are doing. So when they were talking about the technical challenges, they were talking about that, because in between, I don't understand people. You know, you agree, but then you start reneging on what you have agreed on. So as I pointed out earlier on to our viewers since this morning, Red Cross now is in charge. It is Red Cross that's going to take them to the Israel officials. And then the Israeli officials, the military in particular, will then take them to the place where they will then be taken to Israel for debriefs at military centers or the medical centers. So that's what's happening with this story. But finally, I think the world is now witnessing the real implementation of a ceasefire. So on the other hand, there's a camera from our side where you see thousands and thousands of Palestinians going back to their homes, and they don't know what they will be confronted with. Many will be seeing bones and skeletons of their loved ones, and they will start burying their loved ones. So it is a very difficult story at this moment for many people. As you can see, those buses getting into that prison, they are going to pick up Palestinians.
While it is 1,900 Palestinian prisoners in total that will be released by Israel in the 6 weeks ceasefire period, today, however, only 90 prisoners will be released by Israeli prisons to Hamas, and of course they will be then taken to their respective families in Gaza and potentially the West Bank as well. The footage we're seeing on the screen right now is a police escort of the buses of the prisoners that are being released from Offa prison. They will be taken to the Gaza-Israel border, and that's where the exchange will happen. These 90 prisoners will be released in exchange for three Israeli women, rather. It is Emily Damari, Romy Gonen, as well as Doran Steinbrecher. Those are the names that were handed over by Hamas to the Israeli authorities on the first day of the exchange. And this is the nature of the staggered approach that will be executed over the next 6 weeks. Sophie, it is a three-phased ceasefire agreement. It is not a one continuous one. What we're seeing here is the initiation of stage one, or phase one rather, of the ceasefire deal. Talk to us about all the components that make up phase one, which starts today.
Yes, phase one, it's about halting bombardment, or the war for now has stopped, because you want these movements and everybody must be safe. But secondly, the military, the Israeli military, moving out of the densely populated area of Gaza, moving to the outskirts. We saw that as early as at 6 o'clock this morning in the site of the Rafah border, and then later we saw that happening in Gaza. And from there, the release of the hostages, but Hamas handing over the hostages to the Red Cross, and the Red Cross will hand over the hostages to the Israeli authorities, the military. Also, on the other side, you have Israel that will release these Palestinians who are in prisons, and therefore they will then be taken to the border of Gaza. And that's the initial first stage. But what is important, what Antonio Guterres has been calling for, to ensure that you have humanitarian assistance being delivered in Gaza for those who are in need. Now, we've seen trucks coming in, starting to move in, very slow process in relation to the Rafah border. And therefore, that's the initial first phase. And in between this, because it's staggered, you must negotiate and finalize the second phase. And that's where you are really, you have to be careful, because if you don't execute stage one properly or phase one properly, it can lead to the collapse of the second phase.
Some of the prisoners that will be released are many who are identified as political prisoners, Sophie, those who were actively involved in mobilizing Palestinians, not necessarily those who are thought to have been violent, but those who have thought to have been organizing political protests, political organization, and many having been claimed to have staged insurrections against the Israeli government. While we know the names of the 3 Israeli women that are being released today, we don't quite yet know the names of the 90 Palestinian prisoners that are being released. All we know is that it's 70 females and 20 males that are being released today. Does that show an incongruency to you about how this is being managed and dealt with, given that there's a specific set of names on the one hand, but not on the other hand? On the other hand, Israel just said, we'll release them as we do and you'll see who they are.
Well, I don't know whether that's part of the agreement, because when you talk about Palestinians, it's a huge number. And on the other side, it's a small number. One amongst those who are released, the hostages, it's actually a British national, and United Kingdom has already issued a statement. On the other hand, with Palestinians, these are Palestinians. Now, when you look at the category, you can see that Israel is trying to say, I'm releasing those who are not dangerous by their standards, because Palestinians will argue that those you categorize as troublesome, these are people fighting for a just cause. You know that even during apartheid, the Liberation Organization, the military wings, were categorized as terrorists, but we knew then that they were fighting for freedom. So these jargons and words and names sometimes can be very problematic. It depends which side you are in terms of classifying these people.
Yeah.